Hello. This is the fourth lesson in the first Fetter. And the most important takeaway from this entire lesson is question everything. Be curious about everything and question everything. So, where we're at, it's still about identification. It's still about believing that there's someone here, that there's an agent here, that there's someone that holds opinions and memories, and that can feel something happening when you're cut off in traffic, or when someone steals your parking lot, or if you're in the supermarket and somebody comes and pick up something from your trolley and just leaves, or somebody comment on your looks, or someone is speaking down to you, being demeaning towards you. If you still feel something happening in you when that happens, then this lesson is for you. Because when we have it's all about assumptions. All the fetters, the entire path to awakening is all about assumptions. The biggest assumption that we have before awakening is that we're not awake. That's the biggest assumption, because you are. You can never not be. There's just so much assumption happening. There are so much thought happening that you believe in. You believe it to be true. You believe the thoughts to be true. So when you're driving, you have an expectation about you just driving. And when somebody cuts in front of you, they have interrupted that expectation, and you get the feeling that you actually cut off in traffic. But are you really? Are you really? Isn't it just life happening? Isn't it just traffic happening? I mean, if you were approaching a red light, you would have to slow down anyway. So what's the difference? Why do you get angry at somebody cutting you off in traffic? And when you see a red stoplight ahead and you slow down, you're not angry. It's because of your assumptions. It's because you're identifying with what is going on. You identify with you being here, them being there, you being a really, really good driver, them being absolutely muppets. They don't know how to drive. So when you have that assumption about reality, and you have that delusion about what is really going on, that is kind of blurring the vision towards what is actually going on. Not just in your mind and with your thoughts, but in reality, what is really going on. So when I say that you are awake now, it's not something you can become, because you are already. It's like, I find it so funny when there are like courses that teach you to live in the present moment, to be in the now. You can't be anywhere else. You are living in the present moment. You are here, alive, right now. You might be caught in thought and believing that something else is reality. That's just that. That's just your thought. So right now, for example, it's morning here in the UK right now. And I might believe that it's daytime and there's no stars. Obviously there is, I just can't see them right now. So it's the same thing. You are awake, you just can't see it right now. And that's what we're talking about today. So the biggest takeaway for you is to be curious. To be curious. When you're in the supermarket and you're walking around with a cart and somebody comes and picks up something from your cart, be curious about the feelings that is welling up and dwelling up in you. This is my cart. That was my cucumber. How dare you steal my cucumber? Well, was it? Was it really? We have that sense of ownership, which is completely delusional. And it's tied in with expectations, it's tied in with how we view the world. My car, my house, my cucumber. And this only thought, it's not your cucumber. 10 minutes before you entered the store, was it your cucumber? And the mind does that. The ego does that all the time. So when somebody's commenting on your looks, let's say, if you're a man and you go into a restaurant and the waiter says, this way, ma'am, and take you to the table, do you get like, hey, hang on, I'm not a man, I'm a mister? Are you caught up in your identification of your gender? or your looks? A lot of women, they have an issue about age, So if somebody says that you look old, are you caught up in that? Doesn't matter what people think, how they view the world. If it matters to you, then this lesson is really good. The only difference between now and when you awake is that you no longer identify. There's no longer any hooks into any identification. You just are. People just are. Reality just is. And you haven't got any preferences towards anything because you're content with what is. Whatever's happening is completely fine. There's no discussion with reality. You can't argue with reality. You might not want a root canal right now. Well, you need a root canal, so there you go. That's reality. And when you no longer identify, it's the whole attachment to what reality is supposed to be completely falls away. There's no preferences towards anything because what is happening is as it is and as it's supposed to be, clearly. So what the difference is that you don't identify that. Another difference is also that when you're awake, you never have the thought that you're not awake. You know that you are. And I'm telling you, you are right now. You are right now. And that's also why you can access the gap where you feel that pure being. You have experienced it multiple times, I'm sure, where it's like time stands still, it doesn't exist, where form and dimensions is not there, there's just being. I'm sure you have experienced it. And that experience, it might feel fleeting when you're experiencing it, but it's not. That's reality and it's there all the time. The fleeting part is the ego, layer coming in. It's the identification coming in. It's the believing in your thoughts coming in. That's the fleeting part. So be curious to every single feeling you have, every single thought you have. Be curious to what the thoughts are telling you is real. Be curious to who is the thought talking to? Who is the one believing in the thought? Because that's a thought too. So it's like, it's so bizarre. It's like a mirror conversation, with a mirror. The thought is talking to the thought. You bump into a door and you say, clumsy. Who is that assuming that bumping into a door is who being clumsy? Who's being clumsy? And who's telling the who that the person is clumsy, that the thing, the one is clumsy? It's so bizarre. It's thoughts conversing with thoughts. There's no one there. There's not you there to bump into the door. And there couldn't be anything but bumping into the door, because you did. If you have the I shouldn't have bumped into the door, are you sure about that? Question that. Are you sure? Are you sure about that? You clearly did. So are you sure that you shouldn't? Are you sure that you shouldn't? Question everything. Be curious to everything. So what I also would like to talk to you about and really have you understand is that don't try to be forceful. If you have that sense of somebody being somewhere, you're aware that, okay, there's no me, I know that. I know it's all thoughts about thoughts, I know that. And I still have that feeling about somebody being somewhere, some agency being somewhere. I don't know where, but I have that feeling. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't be forceful about anything, because that is just emphasizing what you don't want, what you resist persist. So if you have that sense of somebody being there, it's fine, completely fine. Allow yourself for things to be as they are, and just stay curious. Keep questioning your experiences. Keep questioning the validity of your experiences. What do you experience that you really believe to be true? And how do you know that is true? Because the majority of what is going on is assumptions. If I'm sitting and listening to a sound right now, I will hear a sound and immediately the mind will put a label on it. The first post-it. It's going to put a label on it. It's a bird, or it's a dog, or it's the wind, it's the rain. And that label is removing me, it's like pulling me out of reality, because I'm limiting my experience to a bird, or to a dog, or to rain. You see where I'm going? So be curious to everything. Every single thought you have, be curious. Do not condemn anything. Do not try to make anything go away. Just allow whatever is to be there. And if you have that sense of agency, that there's somebody or something there, it's fine. It's completely okay. You're not in a rush. You're not in a rush. This is not going anywhere. And you are awake anyway, You just have all the layers on top of it. And it's about being curious to the layers. And why are you in a rush? It's one of the pitfalls when we talk about the fetters, because there are 10 fetters, and then the ego immediately go into the striving, into wanting to get there as soon as possible, as quick as possible. It's not how it works. It's not how it works. And if you have a constant comparison with where you are and where you assume you're going, you're just completely locked into ego. Where you are is where you are. It's completely fine. You're not further along or behind anyone or anything. There's nobody wiser than you, and you're not wiser than anybody. It's just assumptions. It's just assumptions, nothing else. In reality, there's just a flow. And there's no rush in figuring that one out. It happens. You're going to see it when you're going to see it. Some people work very diligently towards that awakening, and it's not going to make them go any quicker, because you can have, complete regular Joe, never ever meditated, never known anything about awakening, or never read any books about spirituality, and one morning he or she wakes up and they're just awake. So it's about you figuring out what works for you, and be curious and be honest. Be honest to where you are, you know? And since it's not a linear process, you can't be in front or behind anyone or anything. It's just an ego trip when you believe a trick of the mind that the mind is doing towards the mind that is happening. So just relax about it. And a really good exercise to do when you want to be curious to what is going on in your mind, it's accepting that right now you have the sense of someone. It's okay. It's okay. Accept that's how it is right now. If you don't accept it, it's fine. It's still there. So why not accept it when it's there? So if you bang into the door and you go like, oh, I'm so clumsy, then you can think, yeah, I'm that too. I'm that too. I'm also clumsy. I'm so much more. And I know that every single one of you that have seen through self, that are doing Fetter work, that are further along, you have just choked on your coffee and going like, pardon? Pardon? She wants them to say, I'm so much more. I'm that too. And please bear with me. Please bear with me. The issue that we often have when we still have hooks into desire and aversion, into the fourth and the fifth. The issues that we have roots and are stretching themselves back to this. Because even though you have seen through self, if you still have that thought about things could be different, you know, you want something, you have ambition, you want something, or you have aversion towards someone or something, you want things to be different. If that is you, then there's still hooks back to this. And it does help if you acknowledge that. And don't feel that you're going back when you do this exercise. When you do the I'm so much more exercise. You're just acknowledging that there's something that still needs your awareness. There's something that you are fixating and forceful about. You're fixating on non-identifying. And you're forceful about it. And the whole identifying with non-identifying, it's a thing. It's a thing. So if you're further along in the Fetter work and you feel that you're stuck on the fourth and the fifth, which is about desire and ill will, you know, all the things you want and all the things you don't want. If you're stuck there, then try this exercise. Every time you have a thought, you're curious about the thought. It's not true. It's just like every time you smell something, or every time you see something and your mind put a label on it, you can be curious about it. And every time you have a thought about someone or about a situation or about yourself, then it does dissolve the issue. If you go into the space where you can say, I'm so much more than that. I'm so much more than that. So let's say somebody cuts in front of you in traffic and you have the feeling of bastard. You get really angry. The thought, I'm so much more than this, come on, it's actually dissolving the issue because it brings awareness into the illusion. And I know there's not you, and I know there's not a hierarchy where you can be more or less than anything. But this is a trick of the mind. And the only way to dissolve it is to meet that trick of the mind that is so persistent that you still have issues with it. And it does help. It does help for you to get into the space, into the gap, where you're aware that the thought you have and the limit that you put on yourself when somebody's cutting in front of you in traffic or taking your cucumber from your cart, the thought that you have, the identifying that is happening, the caught on to a fake reality is being dissolved when you remind yourself, I'm so much more than this. And if you're further along, as soon as you think that, I'm so much more than this, then you will get in contact with that space, that waving space. It's difficult to explain, but that space of waves where there's not a you that can be more or less than what actually is. So in my experience, I have found that a lot of people that are still struggling with the fourth and fifth, with desire and ill will, by kind of circling back and indulging the thought of that someone can be angry at something else, or a situation can be annoying, or something can be tempting, it does dissolve the issue when you think, I'm so much more than this. Yeah. And if you have the feeling right now that, well, I know that there's no me. I know that there's no agent, there's no thought, there's nothing. I'm not identifying with anything anymore. I have no ego. Everything is dissolved. I'm just completely in flow with everything there is. If that is you, then I have an assignment for you in a second. Because I want you to be curious towards that. I would like for you to be curious to that assumption, that is possible. I'm not saying that it's not possible. And I'm not saying that it is possible. There's a middle way in between those two. And there's always more twists you can do in the kaleidoscope to become aware of where your assumptions lie, of where your fantasy bumps into reality. Yeah. You've probably heard me say a lot of times that when you let go of all assumptions, everything is different and nothing has changed. And that is exactly how it is to be awake. And what I said, you are already now. You just have a lot of assumptions that you believe in. You have a lot of thoughts that you believe in. You have a lot of identification that you believe in. When you understand that all that is just a belief, it completely falls away. And everything is different. Everything is different. Your relationship with other people is different. Your relationship with any being is different. Your work, your traffic habits, your all that is different. And nothing has changed. Everything is the same. The only thing that is different is that you're not assuming anymore. You're not identifying anymore. It's the only thing that's different. And a lot of things we identify with are so false. They're so false. We have shaped our entire lives on an assumption about a childhood trauma. And if you right now get provoked by me saying that, and you have like, hang on, this is not an assumption. I had a childhood trauma. It really, really did happen. It was horrendous and it did happen. That was not an assumption. First of all, I hear you, and I understand. I relate. Really, I do. I'm not talking about, how can I say that? I'm not talking about it not happening. It did happen. That was the pain. Afterwards, a lot of assumptions and thoughts about what happened was built on top of it. And you started to shape your personality based on those assumptions. It was no longer based on what happened. It was based on those assumptions. So let's say you had a violent childhood. Let's say you were beaten by a parent. And you believed that if you had not done what you did, and if you had not been who you were, then they wouldn't have beaten you. That was the assumption. So you started to change your personality and become different. Be more likable for them to like you. Or you started to tiptoe around when they were near you. That action and that personality was based on the assumption, not on what actually happened. So if you have childhood trauma, if you have any kind of trauma, I really can recommend you finding a good therapist, a psychologist, psychotherapist that can help you with that assumption. Because you need healing. All of us do. All of us have something that we need healing about. And if you need help, then get help. Get help. The first thing you can do is to be open towards yourself about your assumptions on the trauma, on what happened. And if you can, be open to the life view that was shaped on the assumption of what happened. Not what happened, but on the assumption of what happened. Because a lot of us have created a personality based on those assumptions. And then you are sitting here 30 years down the line, 40 years, 50 years down the line. And you start to look at, because you start to be curious, you start to look at everything you assume. Because the thing is, a lot of things that you really, really believe to be true, you're going to find out is nothing but assumptions. It's only assumptions. It's not even true. And that is going to shake your perception of reality. It is. It's gonna change how you see you and other people and how you view the world. Because everything you believe to be true is not. Every opinion you hold is not truth. It's just an opinion. So be curious. Be curious. Every single thought you have, you can follow it up by the question, are you sure? And if we're ever in a meeting together, you'll probably hear me say that a lot. Ask that question a lot. Because I'm super curious to everything I assume, everything that is happening. Because when something is happening, your mind immediately assumes something about it. Be curious to that. Are you sure? Are you sure that is how it is? Just ask questions about it. Be curious about it. Are you sure? So I would like to circle back to what I just talked about with childhood trauma. The only way to deal with trauma is through. You have to go through it. You can't circle around it. You can't just, hope for it to dissolve itself. The only way is through. And it's safe to do it. There's nothing, obviously, if you feel that you need help, then get help, obviously. But it's safe to work with it. It's safe to look at it. It's not happening anymore. Careful with what I'm saying now. What you thought happened. Be curious to if it really happened. And if you have the feeling, yes, but I was beaten. Yes, I'm not questioning that. I'm questioning everything around it. Your assumptions about you being beaten. Yes, I know your body was beaten, but was it because of the person you were? You probably assumed that. But if you hadn't been there, A violent parent is a violent parent. It's not about the child, ever. It's about the parent, the person being violent. It wasn't about you at all. Are you aware of that? Do you know that? That it wasn't about you. It wasn't about you. It was the parent or the person being violent. If you hadn't been there, somebody else would have been there, and the exact same thing would have happened towards that person, because it wasn't about you. It was never about you. And to really become aware of that, to really feel that the entire personality you shaped on that assumption that it was about you and it was your fault, that needs space, and it needs compassion and a lot of love. Just like the trauma would not be there if it had been met with compassion and space and love and kindness. If whatever happened at the moment had been met with that, there wouldn't be a trauma. And that's why the only way to deal with trauma is to do that. Be compassionate. Be kind towards yourself. And when you get small hints that there is a trauma somewhere, it's usually when you're not nice towards yourself, when you call yourself clumsy or say idiot when you do something, when you go like, oh, no, not again, when you do something, when you get short-tempered about something you have done or something you haven't done, frustrated about that you're procrastinating. That is a sign of a trauma. Because who's saying that? Who has an opinion about you should being different than who you are? Who's assuming that? Clearly, it's something you've been taught. Just like the language you speak was taught. Clearly. And the words you're using in your language is very indicative of what you came from, where you came from, of who influenced you. And that needs curiosity. And before I get bombarded in the comment section about, but there is no me, there is no past, I am very aware. I know. This is the first Fetter. We are on stage 1, And if you sit and have, if you have the awareness that there is no you, and there is no trauma, and there is no past, and there is no any of that, and you think it's silly for me to spend time talking about this, then I would like for you to remember how it was to be you before you became awake. All the pain, all the searching, all the struggles, all the anxiety and depression, all of that. Have compassion with the part of you that was there then. And then it's very easy to feel compassion towards the people that are there now. And since you know how it is to be awake, then a sign that you do know that, how it is displayed in your compassion towards the people that haven't seen through self yet. So before you go to the keyboard and write a comment in the comment section about having the thought of, I'm so much more than this, of having thoughts about, it's okay, I'm here. Before you start to comment on that, could you please be compassionate towards yourself? Because I'm sitting and telling you that you are deluded. You're deluded. If you think that it needs to be said, what you already know, it's only because you really don't know it. You're not there yet. And I have an exercise for you in a minute. Yeah. So be compassionate. Be kind to whatever comes up. So if you're at the point where you think there's not a me, there's no longer any identification happening, there's no longer any ego present, I'm just with what is, I'm not influenced by things or people or um, expectations or anything, none of that is left. I'm just purely aware. If that is you, then I have an assignment for you. And I would like for you, for the next 6 months, to do the following. I would like for you to fast for 92 hours every week for the next 6 months. I would like for you to avoid all sexual activity of any kind for the next 6 months. I would like for you to avoid all screen time on any device in any way for the next 6 months. I would like for you to not buy anything besides food for the next 6 months. And I would like for you to stay with friends or family on the sofa in the living room for the next 6 months. If you, after 6 months, have not had any kind of push or pull towards eating whenever you feel like eating, or push or pull towards any kind of intimacy or sexual encounter, or push or pull towards anything that would be nice to have, consumerism, push or pull towards just checking up on the news to see what's going on in the world. I need to answer my emails. If you haven't had any, and you're staying on the sofa of the friends or family, and you're completely fine with anything that's happening, there's not even an inkling in you that wants things to be different than what it is. If that hasn't happened, then stick around. Stick around. And if you have the need right now to defend why you cannot fast 92 hours every week for 6 months, then be curious to that thought. And if you have to defend why you need to be on the screen to take your emails, you need to, for that, for your work, you can't just take time off, and only rich people can do that, and whatever you can come up with of, obstruction to that. Because the whole thing is, I'm not saying that you should do all this. I'm saying be curious to what is happening in you when you decide that this is what you want to do. This is the flow that you want to go with. You want to meditate 19 hours every day. That's the flow you want to go with. Be curious to what is happening with the mind, with the thoughts, with the ego. That is coming with multiple things, multiple reasons to why that can't be done. And I would suggest for you to write all of it down. Remember Ramdas, he said the thing that if you think you're enlightened, go and spend, weekend with your family. It's a great exercise. Because if you have an idea that things need to be in a certain way, then you are not open to what is actually happening. If you completely set people free to be who they are, then what is happening, how they react, what they do, cannot interrupt with the flow of life, clearly, because that is who they are, this is what they do, and that's it. So there's no preferences for them to do differently or be differently or say differently. It just is as it is. Yeah. So what I'm clearly touching on with this exercise is tickling the ego of the ones that are identifying with not identifying. Because the ego is very, Very, very tricky. It really is. It's really good at deluding you into believing that you're further along than what you actually are. If you have an idea that you can be further along or lagging behind, that's just ego. It's not reality. Remember, the ego has that foundational I am not, I should be mentality, which means that you can't be any further than where you are. There's no comparison with anyone. How can there be? It's just ego. It's just a thought about a thought. It's a thought that has assumptions about a thought of where you assume somebody else are. It's a complete mind game. If you think that there's something to achieve or there's somewhere to go, then you are tied into a belief or a dogma or a theory. Because in reality, there's just this. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to achieve. This is it. This is it. So also be curious towards contentment, because the only feeling you can have is contentment. And the only action you can ever show is kindness. Everything else is ego. If you have any other feeling than contentment, then look at it. Look at it. You cannot be anything but content with what is right now. And if you have a feeling about not being content, then be curious to what that illusion is about. How can you not be content? Things are as they are. There's nothing to be but content. There's nothing that needs to change. There's nothing that needs to happen. This is it. This is it. And if you're not content with that, then be curious. Be curious towards that. What is it exactly you expect is going to happen? What is it exactly that you want to be different? How are you not content right now? And everything you can mention that you're not content with, it's just ego. The ego is playing you. The ego is playing you. There's nothing but this right now. You can only be content about it. Even if you're having a root canal while you're listening to this. Or somebody has stolen your cucumber from the cart. There's nothing else than contentment. If you're in a huge argument, there's nothing but contentment. So how can you be content right now? What is it you're missing right now to get in touch with that contentment? And I'm not talking about spiritual bypassing. I'm not talking about, I'm so content. I'm so happy. Yeah, everything is fine. It's not that toxic positivity I'm talking about. It's not that. If somebody steals your cucumber from your cart, you know what I mean? Then be content with realizing that you had an identification. You were identifying with something that you were not aware of actually was a thing. Wow. That's great to become aware of. That's great. If you're in an argument with someone, find the contentment. Right now, when you're in this argument, something is happening in you that will only happen when you argue with this person. It never happens with anyone else. Only with this person. Be content. Because right now you have the opportunity to find out what that is. What is really going on here? What are you really fighting about? Not with the other person. The other person is completely without any significance. What is happening in you? What are you defending? Be content about what you just realized. Because you would not have realized that if it wasn't for this argument. So how can you ever be anything but content? You're deluding yourself when you believe that you can be anything but content. And if you have a list of things, write them down. Feel free to share them in the comment section. I would love to hear. So I would like for you to feel into reality now. Are you taking yourself seriously? Are you still taking yourself seriously? Why? Why do you believe there's something to be serious about? What are you afraid of is going to happen if you do not take yourself seriously? So why is that? Do you see that you is a made-up character that is believed in? Do you see that? If you know that there's no I, and you have seen through self, but you still have this sense of self, this sense of somebody being there, then it's fine. It's completely fine. You're not in a rush. You're not going anywhere anyway. It's fine. It's fine. Relax about it. Just be curious. Take a breather. Be curious to what is happening. And don't worry about it. This is not a linear process. You're not going from A to B. It goes like that. It's 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 1 step back. You go in and out of all the different fetters. The fetters are just concepts. They're just words we put up for you to have a different angle of identification. It's all about identification. Fetter work is all about identification. And it's also why some people, for example, through LU, they see through self and all the fetters fall immediately. They just get it. Some people just wake up and they just get it. It's because it's really, in its essence, it's only about one thing. It's about identification on different levels, but it's about identification. So what I'm talking about is ego death. And normally when I say ego death, a lot of people get really concerned because the word death is there. And that is one thing to be curious about. If you have an issue about death, then be curious about that. If you have had thoughts about suicide or you need help, if you're considering suicide, don't do that. You are this close to realizing something very, very important. And it's not that you want to die, it's just that you don't want to live. So contact a suicide helpline, Don't do it. You're so close to realizing this. When I'm talking about ego death, and when in Buddhism they are talking about spiritual death, it's because that the identification that you have with something needs to go. You cannot step into something new, to a new angle of things, if you're identifying with what you used to identify with. So an ego death needs to happen, and the ego does not want to die. It does not want to disappear. The ego is very, very comfortably nestled into the identification, into what is, and into being in control. And what we are working with is control. It's about control. Because the ego likes to identify and it likes to be in control. The ego is very, very scared of losing control. In its essence, the ego is very scared of dying. And if you're doing inquiry and you have that unconditional acceptance to whatever's coming up, and even if you don't want what is coming up, you have unconditional acceptance to not wanting it to come up, that is rocking the seat of where the ego is so comfortably nestled into. Because the ego wants you to be doubting. It wants you to not get there. Because when you get there, there's no ego anymore. So obviously the selfing would want you to believe that this is a dangerous territory that we go into. And it's not. It's not. It's just about entering a room, turning on the light, looking at what's there. That's it. Nothing more. But that is enough for the ego to dissolve. So if the inquiry is happening and unconditional acceptance is happening, then there will be a surrendering into the feeling of dying and into the feeling of death. And it's not about the body dying, it's about a concept is dying. An identification is dying. It's disappearing and something else is coming instead. And that is the spiritual death and the spiritual awakening. And when we talk about spiritual death and spiritual awakening, the sense of something changing is correct. It is correct. Because something needs to go for something new to come up. You are on the right path. Because you have to let go of what you identify with, and you have to let go of the delusion of life as you know it. So if you still have that sense of an I and me and my and them and they and he and she and I'm here, there, if you still have that sense, it's usually about the ego is afraid of losing control. And I think I'm going to stop this now. This is the first part, and continue in the second part because I think you need a break. So have a break, reflect on what I just said, sit in silence. And when you watch the second part, then be ready to work with the ego death. See you shortly.